I'm Madeline Carter, 16 years old, and I remember the beeping of the monitors before anything else. Cold wires taped to my arms and the harsh smell of bleach clinging to the sheets across the room. My parents stood side by side. My father with his hands in his pockets, my mother holding a clipboard, and then she said, "We just can't afford it, not because the money wasn't there, but because it had already been promised to my younger sister's college tuition." And just like that, they turned and walked out. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to survive something alone when the people you needed most walked away. I was born in North Carolina, raised on quiet Sunday mornings and casseroles delivered after church. My parents ran a college prep business out of a modest brick office near the high school, built their reputation on words like integrity and sacrifice. They liked to tell people that we were a faith-first family that God would always provide. They had 2 daughters. My younger sister Isabel had long blonde hair, a polished smile, and a future mapped out in Ivy League brochures. I was quieter, better at listening than performing. I loved numbers books and quiet afternoons sorting things into categories. At school, I earned straight A's without reminders. At home, it didn't seem to matter much. I never questioned the difference, not at first. Isabel needed more, they'd say. More tutoring, more support, more investment. She had potential. That word came up a lot. Potential. We weren't poor, but every dollar had a purpose, a plan. New laptops for Isabel, a trip to New York for a debate conference, a savings account under her name started when she was 10. I got hand-me-downs. Be patient, my mother would say, your time will come. It didn't. Not even when my ribs started aching in the middle of the night. Not even when I fainted in the school hallway and woke up to bright lights and nurses asking about emergency contacts. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. The doctor explained everything with steady hands and soft eyes. He said the words urgent and immediate, and then gave us a folder with printed options and costs outlined in red. I looked at my parents and waited. Surely they'd speak up. They were the adults. But my mother just shook her head and said, "We won't be moving forward." I don't remember what I said in response. Something soft. Something confused. My father looked at the floor. My mother added that the college money had already been allocated, that Isabel's future couldn't be compromised. She said, "God has a plan," then gave a tight nod and turned toward the door. My father followed. The nurse came in after they left and asked if they were coming back. I didn't answer. That night, I stared at the ceiling, the machines humming beside me. I thought about Isabel's birthday party last spring, the way they'd rented out a theater, ordered custom cupcakes, handed out gift bags with college-themed stickers. I remembered my own last birthday, a gas station cake, no candles. The nurse brought a warm blanket, and for a moment, I let her tuck it under my arms, like I was still someone worth comforting. The next morning, a social worker arrived with a clipboard and careful words. She asked about guardianship backup contacts. I remembered one person, my grandmother Rosemary. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year. She didn't come around much after some kind of falling out with my mother. But I remembered her voice from one Christmas pulling me aside to whisper, "You deserve more love than they know how to give." I gave the social worker her name. Less than an hour later, the hospital phone rang. Grandma's voice on the phone came through in short, breathless bursts. She didn't ask what had happened. She just said she was on her way. I remember watching the hallway through the small window in the hospital door, the clock ticking so loud it felt like it filled the room. Then the door flew open. She wasn't tall, not loud either, but the moment she stepped inside, she filled the whole space. Her sweater was buttoned crooked, her glasses slid down her nose, and her hair was still caught up from the wind outside. But none of that mattered. Her eyes locked on mine, and she crossed the room in a few short steps, took my hand, and said, "I'm here now." She didn't ask questions. She didn't speak in that soft, apologetic voice the social worker used. She just pulled a chair up beside the bed and sat down like she belonged there. The doctors returned that afternoon to go over the treatment plan. They spoke gently but directly explaining what needed to happen and how soon. Grandma didn't blink. She kept nodding and asked what the first step was. When they brought up the cost, her answer was simple. We'll figure it out. That evening, she came back from the car with a canvas tote full of things: flannel pajamas, a lavender blanket, a bottle of hand lotion that smelled faintly like pine, and an old music box shaped like a carousel. I remembered it from her house when I was small. I hadn't seen it in years. She wound it up, and the soft notes played while the little horses turned slowly in a circle. We sat in silence, listening. She told me stories about when I was little. The time I tried to plant jelly beans in her backyard to grow a candy tree. How I used to dance on her toes in the kitchen while we waited for cookies to bake. I didn't say much, just listened. The weight in my chest didn't go away, but something loosened. I fell asleep that night with the blanket tucked up to my chin, and the sound of that old music box still playing in my head. A few days later, I was discharged. The nurses helped pack my things, and the social worker gave us a folder full of forms, follow-ups, prescriptions, a long list of instructions. Grandma loaded everything into her car, the back seat filled with extra pillows and a cooler packed with ginger ale and sandwiches. The car smelled like old books and mint gum. She kept reaching over with one hand to squeeze mine like she needed to make sure I was really there. Her house sat at the end of a quiet street, small and yellow with ivy crawling along one side and a porch that creaked under your feet. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and fresh laundry. She led me to the guest room, a soft bed with clean sheets, a chipped lamp that gave off warm light, and a note taped to the mirror. 4 simple words written in black pen. You are safe here. I stood there a long time, just looking at it. I didn't cry loudly. There was no breakdown. Just quiet, exhausted tears that ran down my cheeks and disappeared into my collar. Grandma didn't ask about the hospital. She didn't mention my parents. She kept the rhythm of the house steady and slow. Oatmeal with cinnamon in the morning. Chamomile tea at night. She read in the chair beside me while I dozed on the couch, her knitting needles clicking softly. The silence in her house wasn't empty. It felt like permission to rest. A week later, she brought her laptop out onto the porch where I sat wrapped in a blanket. She had a worn notebook open beside her. I've been researching clinics, she said, talking to some nonprofit groups, a few health foundations. We'll find a way to get the rest of this covered. I didn't know what to say. I'd spent so long assuming help came with strings. She looked over and added, You're not a burden, Madeline. You're my granddaughter. That's enough. That sentence stayed with me, not because it was loud, but because it didn't have to be. I began to heal in pieces. I could sit up longer without feeling dizzy. I walked slowly to the mailbox and back, holding onto Grandma's elbow. On those walks, we talked about anything but the past, books, birds in the yard, the names of the neighborhood cats. I started smiling again. A little at a time, I believed I might make it through. Still, the silence in my childhood home hadn't begun with the hospital. It went back further than that. Isabel and I were close in age, but we might as well have grown up in different households. She had themed birthday parties and private dance lessons. I got leftover decorations and hand-me-downs with frayed sleeves. They talked about Isabel at church, bragged about her college prospects, her early scholarship interviews. My name rarely came up. At family dinners, I was introduced as the quiet one. At first, I tried harder, joined every club, brought home awards, even placed second in the state spelling bee. I came home that night holding the little silver medal. I set it on the dinner table, hoping someone might notice. My mom glanced at it and said, Could you not wear that at the table, sweetie? It's distracting. That medal ended up in the back of my drawer. I never brought it out again. It wasn't hate that lived in our house. It was something quieter. Indifference. I wasn't ignored out of cruelty. I was ignored out of convenience. And when I got sick, they didn't shift. They didn't pause. They stayed exactly the same. A few days after I moved in with Grandma, I saw Isabel's college announcement on social media. A photo with balloons, a caption that read, "So proud of our girl. Can't wait to see all she accomplishes." No mention of me. No acknowledgement that just across town, their other daughter was recovering from a life-threatening illness. I stared at that screen for a long time. I hadn't expected anything, but a small part of me had still hoped. They weren't waiting for me to come home. They were waiting for me to disappear, but I hadn't. I was still here. And in that little yellow house, something was beginning to shift. Not just my health, but something deeper. A quiet decision was starting to take shape. The first time I walked to the end of the street and back without stopping, Grandma clapped from the porch like I'd just run a marathon. I still had to hold on to the railing near the driveway, still had to sit down and catch my breath when I came in, but it was something. We marked the little milestones with sticky notes on the fridge, walked to mailbox, kept oatmeal down, slept through the night. The notes weren't for show. They were for us. Reminders that I was healing slowly and not just on the outside. Inside the house, Grandma kept everything steady. Mornings started with oatmeal and black tea. Evenings ended with a book in her lap and the porch light on. In between, I rested on the couch or sat on the front steps, wrapped in a quilt, watching the neighbors walk their dogs or water their flower beds. Sometimes she'd point out birds by name. Cardinals, finches, the occasional woodpecker. I'd just listen. There was no pressure to speak. One morning, I woke up to a message on my old phone. Isabel's college acceptance post had been reshared again. Big smiles, gold balloons, a string of congratulations in the comments. I clicked through out of habit, not even sure why. Scrolling through the pictures, I saw my parents standing behind her, arms around her shoulders, grinning like they'd just won a prize. The caption read, "So proud of our girl. She's going to change the world." There was no mention of me. I closed the app and set the phone down. There was no anger, not really, just that familiar quiet, the one I'd grown up with. I wrapped the blanket tighter and stared at the ceiling, trying not to wonder what would have happened if Grandma hadn't picked up that call. A few days later, I overheard her talking on the phone in the kitchen. She was asking about a prescription discount program, politely explaining my case, giving dates and diagnoses with a steady voice. When she came back into the living room, she didn't say anything about the call, just handed me a glass of water and reminded me to take my pills. I started helping where I could. Folding laundry, wiping the counters, reading the mail out loud so she didn't have to hunt for her glasses. Little things. Then one day, I asked, "Can I help with bills?" She raised an eyebrow. "You don't need to worry about that." "I know. I just want to do something." She didn't argue, just nodded and went back to peeling carrots at the sink. That night, I pulled out my old laptop and logged into a tutoring site I'd signed up for months ago. My profile was still there. I edited the description, added the hours I was available, and waited. It didn't take long. A parent messaged me about helping their son with algebra, then another. Soon I had 4 students, then 7. Most of the kids were middle schoolers. A few were high school freshmen. One girl told me, "You explain it better than my teacher." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled and kept going. It wasn't about the money, not really, though it helped. We stopped cutting the grocery list in half. Grandma stopped skipping her vitamins. There was breathing room. One night, we sat on the porch with mugs of peppermint tea. The air was cool, the kind that made you pull your sleeves over your hands. She looked over and said, "You seem more like yourself now than I've ever seen you." I glanced at her. "What do you mean?" She tapped her fingers against her mug. "Your parents always treated you like background. But you were never background, honey. You just needed space to grow. Somewhere, no one was blocking the light." I didn't say anything at first. I just watched the steam rise from my tea. But her words stayed with me. I'd spent years trying to be smaller, quieter, easier. I helped Isabel with homework, cleared the dinner table, stayed home when she had recitals or school trips that needed the family's full attention. It had always been that way. She was the one they talked about at church. I was the one introduced as the quiet one. There were moments I remembered clear as glass. The spelling bee in 7th grade, second place in the state. I came home holding the silver medal beaming. At dinner, I placed it on the table waiting. My mother barely glanced at it. "Can you not wear that at the table, sweetie? It's distracting." That was it. I tucked the medal into my desk drawer that night. I never brought it out again. Even before I got sick, I was fading. Not out of spite, out of habit. My role was quiet, supporting, unseen. And when the diagnosis came, nothing changed. They didn't suddenly realize what they were about to lose. They didn't hold my hand or ask questions. They looked at the numbers and made a choice. One afternoon, while clearing out old files on my phone, I came across a screenshot I didn't remember saving. A text from my mother to Isabel. "Don't worry about your sister. She'll come home when she stops being dramatic." Another from my father. "We can't throw away Isabel's future on a maybe. Madeleine's strong. She'll figure it out." I stared at those messages for a long time. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was intentional. They didn't choose Isabel's future over mine because they had no choice. They chose it because they didn't want to choose me. The next day, I was on the porch with Grandma when a name popped into my head: Eleanor Stratton. I'd heard it so many times over the years, I could recite her bio from memory. Founder of the Stratton Scholars Network, former admissions dean, now running a private foundation that handpicked students for top-tier college grants. My parents idolized her, invited her to dinners, mentioned her name in every brochure and client pitch. She was the crown jewel of their business, the woman who validated everything they stood for. I wondered if she knew. Did she know that the same people who claimed to champion opportunity had walked out of a hospital room while their daughter lay hooked up to machines? I didn't want a public reckoning. I didn't want to post about it or start a campaign. I just wanted her to know. That evening, while Grandma baked banana bread, I sat down at her old desktop and opened a blank email. I wrote slowly. Just the facts. No drama. No pleading. I explained what had happened. I said I was Madeleine Carter, daughter of Mark and Catherine Carter. I said that when I needed urgent treatment, they declined because the money had been set aside for my sister's college tuition. I explained I survived because my grandmother stepped in. Then I attached Copy's hospital paperwork, the text, the report from the social worker. At the end, I wrote, "I thought you might want to know what kind of people you're endorsing." Then I signed it with my name, and I hit send. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't need one, but something had shifted. The email was short. Just fax documents and a name Eleanor Stratton had likely heard many times before. I didn't rewrite it after I sent it. I didn't reread it either. I closed the browser and helped Grandma fold laundry while the banana bread cooled on the windowsill. That night, we ate warm slices with a little butter, and she asked if I wanted to plant herbs in the front garden once spring came. I said yes. I didn't tell her about the email. 2 weeks later, I checked my parents' business website. The golden badge at the top, proud partner of the Stratton Scholars Network, was gone. No message, no update, just gone. I checked the Stratton directory. Their names had been removed, not crossed out, not transferred, just erased. The page looked emptier without them. I watched the changes quietly. First, it was the missing badge. Then a few glowing client reviews disappeared. Then came a canceled speaking event. Another consulting contract left unrenewed. By the end of the month, the updates on their site had slowed to a crawl. Isabel's photo still sat on the front page, arms folded over a stack of college brochures, but it looked oddly out of place now. Like a sign on a store that had already closed. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. Not Grandma. Not the students I tutored. I just kept working, kept resting, kept healing. The tutoring picked up. A boy named Darren who hated fractions. A girl named Layla who whispered when she read out loud. They didn't know anything about me, not really. They just needed someone to help them make sense of the page in front of them. I liked that. It felt simple, clean. In early spring, Grandma surprised me with a little wooden desk she'd found secondhand. She set it up in the sunniest corner of the living room and helped me organize my notebooks and pens. We put a small plant on the windowsill and taped a calendar to the wall beside it. It wasn't much, but it was mine. That same week, I got a message from a school counselor I'd never met asking if I'd be interested in helping with an online program for students needing one-on-one tutoring. I said yes. Then another message came, and another. Word was spreading. Meanwhile, the quiet unraveling of my parents' business continued. A few months after I sent the email, I saw a real estate listing pop up online. Office space for lease. The address was theirs. I double-checked. The company name had been scraped off the front door. There was a fresh coat of paint over the old sign. A forum thread later mentioned they'd moved operations into their house. Another thread said the house had been sold. I didn't look into it further. I didn't need to. That summer, I was invited to speak on a mentorship panel. It was part of a small conference hosted by an education nonprofit. Mostly teachers, counselors, and advocates who worked with vulnerable youth. I didn't expect to be asked, but the email said they'd heard about the tutoring program I'd helped build and thought my perspective would be meaningful. I asked Grandma if I should say no. She looked over the invitation, adjusted her glasses, and said, "Sounds like they asked because they think you have something to say. That's reason enough to say yes." So I did. The panel was held in a community center just outside Raleigh. Folding chairs, a pitcher of water on the table, name tags on lanyards. My voice shook at first, but I focused on the students, on the way they struggled with focus or lost homework, or those awkward silences when no one asked how their day was going. I shared what I'd learned. I kept it simple, honest. Afterward, I stepped down from the platform and saw them standing by the back exit. My mother's hair was pinned up like she'd rushed to fix it in the car mirror. My father's suit was the same one he used to wear to client meetings, but the shoulders sagged more than I remembered. They both looked tired, older. "Maiden," my mother said. Her voice cracked around the word. "Please, just a minute." I didn't move. My father stepped forward. "We know we made mistakes. We've lost everything." I stood there, arms crossed steady. "We saw your name on the program," my mother said. "We didn't know how far you'd come." I waited. "We didn't know you'd survive," I said. My mother looked down at the floor. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. "We were scared," she whispered. "We didn't know what to do." "No," I said. "You knew what to do. You chose not to." My father looked up. "We're not asking for much. Just help. Anything. Things aren't good." I paused, then tilted my head. "When I was in that hospital bed, you said you couldn't afford to save me." They didn't speak. I nodded. "I'm just returning the favor." Then I walked past them. I didn't look back. That night, Grandma and I sat on the porch with cups of chamomile tea and a blanket across our knees. The wind moved softly through the trees. She didn't ask how it went. She just passed me the sugar and poured a little more into my cup. I looked out into the dark and said, "They tried to erase me." She reached over and took my hand. They failed. And for the first time, I believed her. After the conference, life didn't shift overnight, but something felt different. I returned home to the quiet yellow house where Grandma had already set out a plate of cookies and the evening paper. She didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer much. We sat on the porch with the radio low and a soft breeze coming through the screen door. A neighbor's dog barked once, then went quiet again. It was the kind of calm that doesn't ask for anything. By then, the tutoring had grown into something steady. I had a set schedule. Monday and Wednesday afternoons were full. Tuesday mornings belonged to two siblings who shared one old laptop. Thursday evenings I kept open for emergencies, a quiz coming up, a forgotten essay. Word had spread quietly. Most of the kids came from homes where things slipped through the cracks. Missed meetings. Report cards no one read. I didn't ask questions. I just helped. In late summer, one of my students, Jada, sent a thank you note through her mother. It was written in blue marker with uneven letters and hearts in the corners. "Thank you for helping me not feel dumb." I stuck it to the wall above my desk with a piece of tape. That night, I sat with my laptop open and looked at the numbers. I had enough. Not just to help with groceries or prescriptions, but more. I could start something real. At first, I didn't know what it would be. I pulled out a notebook and started scribbling ideas. A few scholarships for kids like Jada, free prep sessions for students who couldn't afford consultants, an online space where no one had to explain why they didn't ask their parents for help. I didn't name it after myself. I didn't name it after anyone. Just a simple title, Second Chance Sessions, and a quiet mission to make sure no kid had to weigh their future against someone else's ambition. Grandma helped me sort through the paperwork. She called it our little project, though I did most of the typing. She made a pot of chili one night while I set up the donation page. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. It was already there in the way she folded the napkins and handed me a spoon, like we'd been doing this all along. By fall, the first round of students was enrolled. Small group at first, 6 in total. One had just moved from another state. One lived with her aunt. They met once a week online through a free platform with slow video and crackly sound. But they showed up, every single week. Meanwhile, my parents stayed silent. No more contact. No new posts. The photos of Isabel's graduation had stopped appearing on their site. Their business pages were frozen in time. The Contact Us button led to an error message. I didn't check often, just enough to know they hadn't rebuilt anything. Not yet. Grandma and I fell into a rhythm. Mornings were quiet. Afternoons hummed with the sound of typing and kettle whistles. Some days, I still got tired. Some nights the dreams came back, but they didn't stay long. Not with her nearby. Then one Wednesday morning, she left a note on the kitchen table next to a glass of orange juice. "Call this number, Office Manager, Ridgewood Academy. Left a message for you." I stared at it for a while before picking up the phone. The woman who answered introduced herself as a coordinator for an after-school program. She said they'd heard about my work from another mentor in the network. They were looking for someone to design a pilot tutoring curriculum. Paid, flexible hours, room to grow. She asked if I'd consider it. I said yes. The following week, I stepped into a new building, not as a student, not as someone's daughter, but as someone whose name was on the packet, someone whose opinion mattered. The walls were lined with student art. The floors smelled faintly of pencil shavings and disinfectant. A teacher waved from a doorway. A kid zipped past with a backpack twice his size. It felt ordinary in the best way. At the end of that first meeting, the program lead shook my hand. "You're clearly doing this for the right reasons," she said. "It shows." I walked home slowly that day. The air was crisp, and the trees had just started turning. I passed the park near our street and sat on a bench under the maple tree. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about what had happened. I was thinking about what came next. That evening, while we ate soup and cornbread, Grandma asked if I'd had time to open the envelope on the desk. I hadn't noticed it. I brought it over and peeled back the flap. Inside was a small card with the name of the first scholarship recipient, Jada. There was a photo attached. She held a certificate with both hands, her smile wide and unsure. On the back, she'd written, "Thank you for giving me a place to belong." I didn't speak for a while. Grandma just reached for my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Then she passed me the jam and asked if I wanted another slice of bread. It was late October when the phone rang, a landline, not my cell. Grandma answered from the kitchen while I was putting away dishes. She spoke softly, then walked into the living room and held out the receiver. "It's for you," she said. "Someone from the foundation?" "Stratton." I dried my hands and took the phone. The woman on the line introduced herself as an assistant to Eleanor Stratton. She said she couldn't go into details, but there had been a formal review. After further evaluation, my parents' organization had been permanently removed from the Stratton Scholars Partnership. Their endorsements, affiliations, and access to student referrals were no longer valid. Then she paused. "I just wanted to say," she continued, "we read your letter. It mattered." She thanked me, then ended the call. It was short, direct, quiet. I set the phone back on the hook. That night, I walked to the corner store and bought a small tin of peach tea I'd been eyeing for weeks. Grandma brewed a pot while I sat at the table watching the steam rise from the cups. She didn't ask about the call. I didn't offer much. We sipped in silence. The next few weeks were filled with small changes I hadn't expected. One local school dropped my parents from its vendor list. Another canceled a workshop they were scheduled to lead. A third released a statement about reassessing affiliations. The newsletter that used to go out from my parents' business boasting college placements and scholarship stats stopped arriving. I knew they'd try to recover, rebrand, maybe rebuild under a different name. But the difference was, this time, people were asking questions. Quiet ones, the kind that linger. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post online or share anything with the students I mentored. I kept tutoring. I kept organizing the fall study schedule. The kids were preparing for midterms, and one of them had just discovered flashcards for the first time. Life at home stayed calm. Grandma hung a wreath on the front door made of pine cones and plaid ribbon. We made soup on Sundays and lit a candle in the kitchen every evening when the light started to fade early. The days got shorter. My to-do list got longer, but everything felt steady. Then, one afternoon, while walking home from the library, I saw the flyer taped to a bulletin board near the bus stop. Office space available, formerly Carter Academic Strategies. I paused for a second, then kept walking. A week later, a local educator I'd met through the mentorship program invited me to speak at a school event downtown. It was an evening panel with 4 other women, all of us working with students in different ways. One ran a food pantry, one taught ESL, one coordinated school transportation. We met for coffee before the event and shared stories about what had brought us there. I sat in the third chair from the left. My name was printed on a folded card at the edge of the table. It didn't feel like a big deal, but it felt like something real. After the panel ended, a small crowd gathered near the front of the room. Teachers, parents, a few students. I answered questions, shook hands, and packed up my notes. I was halfway to the door when I saw them. My mother stood by the wall in a long coat, her arms folded across her chest. My father was beside her holding a folder. Their expressions were unfamiliar, like they were still deciding what to say. They stepped forward. "Maiden," my mother began, her voice low. "Could we talk?" I stood still. "We didn't expect to find you here," my father added. "We just came for the final session. A friend invited us." I didn't respond. My mother looked down. "We saw the program. We saw your name." They looked tired. Her makeup was uneven. His shoes were worn at the edges. My father tried again. "We've had a rough year." I nodded once, just enough for him to continue. "We lost a lot. Clients, partners, the house." There was a long pause. "We know we hurt you," he said, "and we don't expect forgiveness." My mother stepped closer. "We're not here to ask for much. Just maybe some help. Something small. Even just a recommendation." I looked at the two people who had once stood in a hospital room and decided to walk away. I thought about the nights in Grandma's house when I couldn't sit up without help. The porch tea, the music box, the letters from the students whose names they'd never learn. When I needed treatment, I said, "You told me you couldn't afford to help me." They said nothing. I stepped back. "I'm just returning the favor." Then I walked toward the exit, heels soft on the carpet, coat folded over my arm. I didn't look back. When I got home, Grandma was in the kitchen stirring a pot of stew. The windows fogged from the heat. She handed me a spoon and said, "Taste this and tell me if it needs salt." I did. It didn't. The days that followed were quiet the way early winter days tend to be. Morning frost gathered on the porch railings. The house creaked more often. We kept the heater on low and added an extra blanket to the couch. The tutoring sessions slowed a bit around the holidays, but the regular students still showed up. One boy even wore a tie for his video call. He said it was for good luck on a math quiz. I printed out his results when he emailed them 88, up from 60. I pinned it beside Jada's thank you note on the corkboard above my desk. The scholarship fund had begun gaining traction. A few former students wrote in to say how the sessions had helped them get into their preferred schools. A counselor from out of state asked for permission to use some of the materials I'd developed. I gave it freely. That was the point. To keep it open, accessible, simple. No names and lights. No speeches. Just a door that stayed unlocked. I found myself thinking less about what had happened and more about what could happen next. That feeling of being future-facing was new. For a long time, everything had felt like aftermath. Now, I had something else. A pace. A rhythm. Something that belonged to me. Grandma didn't say much about it, but she noticed. She started giving me full control of the grocery list. She handed over the checkbook one afternoon without comment. "You know what we need better than I do," she said. One evening, in early December, I surprised her with something I'd been planning for months. She'd always talked about wanting to be near water. Something quiet. Not too far. A place with windows and space to breathe. I'd found a small house, white siding, cedar shutters, a wide porch that faced a lake. 2 bedrooms, 1 reading room, a kitchen that let in the morning light. The down payment came from the tutoring work. The scholarship fund remained untouched. We drove out to see it on a Saturday. I told her it was just a weekend drive. She brought lemon drops and a thermos of coffee. The minute we pulled into the gravel driveway, she turned to me and said, "What is this?" I handed her the envelope with the papers. She didn't open it right away, just held it in both hands like she needed a moment to steady herself. Inside the living room was empty, but warm. Light spilled across the floor from tall windows, and there was a wooden rocking chair already in the corner. It had come with the house, the realtor said. We left it there. Grandma walked through the kitchen in slow circles. She touched the cabinet handles, looked out over the lake. In the back room, she sat on the windowsill and stared out at the trees. When I finally spoke, I said, "This is for you, because you stayed." She didn't answer, just reached for my hand and squeezed. We moved in a few weeks later, bringing only what mattered. A few photo albums, her worn quilt, my desk, and notebooks. She set up her reading chair by the window. I unpacked the mugs. On the first morning in the new house, she made oatmeal and set 2 bowls on the table before calling my name. Her cardigan was wrapped tight, her hair pinned back with one of the old clips from the yellow house. When I sat down, she smiled and said, "Feels like home already." I nodded. It did. That afternoon, I checked the foundation email and found a letter from a student I didn't know. She'd heard about the program through her aunt who taught at a middle school in Tennessee. She wrote about struggling in science, about how tutoring had made her feel seen. At the end, she added a single sentence, "You made something real." I printed it out and taped it to the wall next to the others. That night, we lit a candle in the living room and played music from a small speaker. The lights outside flickered on as the sun dipped below the trees. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. It had taken time to get here. And not just the physical place. The steady routine. The feeling of waking up without dread. The ability to say no when someone asked for something that used to cost too much to give. I thought of the hospital bed, the clipboard, the quiet hum of machines. I thought of my parents' silence when they left the room. And then I looked across the table at the woman who had said yes, without questions, without hesitation. We settled into the new house slowly. There was no rush. Boxes stayed half unpacked for weeks. Grandma said she liked seeing things take shape a little at a time. I planted herbs by the kitchen window, the same way she'd once done for me. Mint, basil, lavender. The kind that filled a room without ever needing much space. The tutoring continued, though I took on fewer sessions. I spent more time working on the scholarship program, making sure applications were simple, outreach was quiet but steady, and no one ever had to write an essay about why they deserved help. If they asked, we gave. On Grandma's birthday, I surprised her with a cake from the same bakery that had once turned us away for closing early. This time, the woman behind the counter recognized my name from a school flyer. She handed over the box with both hands and said, "Thank you for what you're doing." Later that night, we sat outside wrapped in blankets, watching the reflection of the stars on the lake. The crickets had come back early. Grandma held her tea with both hands and said, "You know, I used to think survival was enough, that getting through was the same as living." I didn't answer. I just listened. She looked at me and smiled. "But you didn't just survive. You built something better." I thought about that for a long time. The girl in the hospital bed, 15, scared, waiting for someone to come back, she wouldn't have believed any of this. Not the porch, not the students, not the quiet that didn't feel like silence anymore. And I think that's the real shift. Not just that I got stronger, but that I stopped needing to be seen by the people who chose to look away. My parents never tried again. No more messages, no more requests. I heard through someone that they'd moved out of state, started over maybe. I didn't follow up. That chapter had closed a long time ago. What stayed with me wasn't the pain or the anger. It was the small things. The note on the mirror that first night. The music box. The way Grandma read out loud when I was too weak to hold a book. That kind of care doesn't erase what came before, but it gives you something new to stand on. I never used their names in the scholarship paperwork. I never spoke about what happened in any public speech. But the choices I made, every one of them, came from that moment in the hospital. When someone said, "We can't afford to save you," and someone else said, "We'll figure it out." Sometimes Justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's a door that stays closed and a window that opens quietly on the other side of town. We kept living. That's the best way I can put it. We kept making dinner, planting things, laughing at the way our bread never rose right, no matter what recipe we tried. And one night, long after the wind had stilled and the porch light had blinked off, I whispered, "Thank you for not letting me disappear." Grandma squeezed my hand and said, "You were always here. You just needed someone to stay long enough to see it." Thank you for staying with me through this story. If any part of it reminded you of your own quiet strength, or someone who stood by you when no one else did, feel free to share in the comments or send it along to someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like more stories like this one, you know where to find me.